Welcome to Making Eating Healthy Again, the podcast where we simplify the complexities of modern nutrition and guide you back to the basics of wholesome eating. In today's world, dietary recommendations become a maze of conflicting advice and overwhelming research and trending fads that make eating healthy feel more like an unsolvable puzzle. Each day brings new headlines on superfoods, diet plans, and miracle supplements, leaving us more confused than ever about what we should really be eating. Join us as we cut through the noise to uncover simple, science-backed practices that can transform your health, delight your taste buds, and make eating healthy a joyous journey once more. Whether you're a seasoned foodie or just beginning your quest for better health, we've got you covered with insights, motivational stories, and practical tips. I'm Woody Huffines, and I am fortunate to be able to join registered dietitian Danielle Carr each week to talk to you about how you can make eating healthy again. Cool. We're back together again. How was your week?
It was a great week. It was a busy week. It's funny, every time someone asks me that, I don't know if you feel the same way. It's like, oh, what did I do? What did I do yesterday? I don't know. We got a fish tank.
You got a fish tank?
Yep. About $500 later. I'm like, why did we get a fish tank? We had a free fish tank, 10-gallon fish tank. And I was like, let's get a fish for the kids. Well, if you know my husband.
I do.
He goes big. I know you know him very well. He's going to do something. Look around here. He's going to do it.
He's going to do it.
We got a big fish tank. So we got some fish yesterday, and now they're all in the filter. So we got some cheap fish to start, and we looked this morning, and they sucked up in the filter. So that was part of our week. It's good.
The Doge is asking people to give me an email of the 5 things that you did last week, and everybody's having a hemorrhage about it.
I saw that.
And it's, it's like 5 things. If all you could come up, the excitement over just the 5 things you did in the week. Really? I have to write down what I'm doing during the day at the end of the day to remember all the stuff that I did.
I know.
Are you one of those list writing people?
Oh yeah. I love lists. Are you a list writer?
No.
Then how do you remember what to do?
I don't forget things and I start a list and then the list takes a life of its own. You're one of these people that you've got your list, and if you do something that's not on your list, you write it on the list so you can cross it out.
100%. I write exercise on my list. I write journal on my list and cross it out because I'll journal at the end of every night. Quick, like a little.
I lost it for a long time on a move, and I'm going to go find another one. I may order one. It's one of the coolest journaling things I've ever seen. It was a book. It's a really thick book.
Yep.
And each page is cut into 5 little sections.
Yep. For each.
So for a year, you go across the first year and then the second year. So it's a daily note of what happened today that you can then look back. What happened today 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yes. So that's what I do. I'm so excited that somebody else is excited about that. I want to tell everybody about that. I started it 2 years ago. I'm hesitant because it was in half of the year, and I was like, should I do this? And I'm so glad I just started it, not to wait until January. But that's why I was like, I write this much in a journal because I have journaled since I was in 2nd grade. And then I went through some crazy life things, as everybody does, and I stopped, and I didn't want to journal what I was going through, which is, I wish I did. But anyway, long story short, I finally, after a few years of not journaling, was like, let me just start somewhere. And I found that. I really recommend it. And it's hard. I've stopped the last couple of weeks just because I just have. I've been like, I don't want to think about it, what I did today, which is so silly. And when you do, it's so therapeutic.
And the bullet journal is the thing that works for me.
Okay.
I've done time management systems of different kinds, but the bullet journal works for me. And I asked the journal question or talk about the journal question because we're going to talk today about calories in, calories out versus a carbohydrate insulin model. Mm-hmm. And to kind of set the stage for that discussion, I've got some information that I put together because one of the things that last week you talked about was that you had learned the carbohydrate or calories in, calories out model was what you learned in school.
Oh, yeah.
Just point blank, period, paragraph. It was calories in, calories out. Mm-hmm. And so a week before that, since I knew we were going to talk about calories in, calories out. and journaling, one of the things that I use, there's an application, it's called Chronometer, which is a great application to keep track of your macros in your food.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I sent you an example of some of the stuff that you can do in Chronometer when I was showing you some things. But from February 23rd to March 1st,
Yes.
I'm not going to be strict carnivore. I'm going to change the number of carbohydrates that I eat in a day, and just going to go 1 week and look at all of the metrics. How many carbohydrates are you eating? Because normally I'm trying to keep my carbohydrate count at 10, very, very
10 grams.
carnivore. And I'm looking at 10 grams a day, generally.
Yep.
So I ramped up so that I wouldn't do a major perturbation to my system. I ramped up, I think I started on Tuesday of that week. I had like 40 grams on Tuesday, and then like 60 grams on Wednesday, and then 80 grams on Thursday, and then Friday all the way up to like 135 grams. I went to Cece's Pizza. I haven't eaten pizza since Christ was a corporal.
Yeah, hold on. What did Cece's Pizza taste like? It couldn't have tasted like pizza.
It tasted,
did?
pizza. That's what I tell people.
I haven't been there
For me,
years.
pizza's kind of like sex. The worst I ever had was still pretty good.
Oh my God, that's great. I think I'll use that line.
So I calculated all of this stuff out. So on average during that week, I had 73 grams of carbohydrates a day.
Okay.
Now, if you think in terms of the way the food pyramid is designed, okay, that is still a pretty low carbohydrate count.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, 60% of 2,000 calories, if 60% of 2,000 calories is 1,200 grams, which is like 300 grams of carbs.
Yeah, anything less than 140 grams of carbohydrate based on a 2,000 calorie diet, that'd be, let me start with anything less than 140 grams of carbohydrates would be a low carb diet. And that's about 26%.
And see, and I'm
73 grams.
And I'm usually at 3%.
Yeah.
2%, 3%. So my point is, with me eating 73 grams of carbohydrates a day, that is a significant carbohydrate load
big
for
change.
me. Okay. So during the week, tracking all of my calories, everything that I burned, I had a caloric deficit per day of 1,000 calories a day.
Okay.
I was down 998 calories a day. So
that's what you were eating is 998 calories?
I was averaging 1,654 calories a day of intake. Basal metabolic rate, thermic effect of food activity, and baseline estimate put me at 2,652 calories a day that I was burning between the Oura Ring, tracking movement and things like that. The 2,600 calories a day was what the estimate for burn was. Yep. And 1,600 was what I was actually eating. So it's 1,000 calorie a day deficit. Yeah. So for the week, that's 7,000 calorie deficit. Mm-hmm. So you would predict, using the calories in, calories out model, that I would lose 2 pounds because that's 7,000 calories. Mm-hmm. I actually gained 2.3 pounds.
Really?
I weighed
so many questions.
I weighed on Saturday morning before I started the diet, and then ate that way through Saturday, and then Sunday morning got up and weighed to see what the change in weight was. So that is 4.3 pounds above what the calories in, calories out model would predict.
I'm curious, how did you feel? Because that is a drastic change.
I felt like crap. That's why.
Did you?
That's why I ramped up and just went, I got to quit. I just felt bad. I mean, even at 65 or 70 grams, I didn't feel great.
What were you eating to get the 70 grams?
I was eating
the 140.
Medjool dates. I'd go get some dates. I'd go get, I was eating dates. I was eating fruit. I was trying to eat fruit so that I didn't have a lot of other garbage in. Because I think seed oils, and we'll talk about this eventually, I think seed oils are a compounding effect
my goodness,
for unhealthy things and weight 100%. Gain. Mm-hmm. So this week, I put on the glucose monitor this week, which is another thing we can talk. We'll have the data to talk about. So this week, I went back to my normal carbohydrate load. Okay. I averaged 15 grams of carbohydrates a day for the week. Now that carbohydrate load for the week was significantly skewed because last night we went out to dinner. And my wife hates it when we go out to dinner and I order a hamburger patty and drink water. So if it's date night, I try to play along.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had some popcorn shrimp as an appetizer, and I had a crab cake.
Okay.
It was 2-ounce crab cake. And I had a couple of cups of broccoli. And then we went to the wine place where our wine membership is. And then I had three glasses of wine over the course of the evening while we listened to live music for 3 hours.
Oh, it sounds like such a fun date night.
It was a great fun date night, but that was 44, 43, 45 grams of carbohydrates on that one day,
Yeah,
which brought the average for the week up to 15 grams. If you take out that, my average carbohydrate load for the day was like 3 grams.
Yeah.
Okay. If you take out that one anomalous night. Okay. So if you look at low carb week, I was eating 1,536 calories a day.
Okay.
My activity this week was I was burning 2,900 calories a day on average. I did some more working out.
So about the same calories as before and burning about 300 calories more than before.
So my caloric deficit per day for the week was 1,364 calories.
Okay.
So about 350 calories less per day than I was when I was eating carbs.
Okay.
So that's the first little penny that should drop for people is I ate less when I was eating fewer carbs.
Yes.
Okay, and that's an argument that we'll talk about that argument. One of the arguments about carnivore or keto is that it's a natural caloric restriction. That people that eat keto, they lose weight because of caloric restriction. They don't lose weight because of the fact that they're eating keto. And we'll talk about what I think is the fallacy in that. So anyway, if you add that up, that's 9,548 calorie deficit for the week. Which would predict a 2.7 pound weight loss, which is the 9,548 divided by 3,500. It's 2.73 pounds predicted weight loss. My actual weight loss was 3.89 pounds.
Wow.
So I actually lost a pound more than was predicted.
Absolutely, yep.
And the interesting part of that is Friday morning, before the weekend came and I was humoring my wife, the loss would have actually been 6 pounds.
That's amazing. So the difference of you on, which is still a low carb plan, what you were on before, you gained 2.3 pounds, and this time only having about 15 grams of carbohydrate, more, which we'll talk about in a little bit, of more of that lower carb, very low carb plan, you lost 4 pounds.
And would have been 6
That's amazing.
And I did an experiment this morning at 1:30 this morning. I took a 75 gram carbohydrate hit to look to see what carbohydrate intake would do to sleep patterns.
Yeah.
And look at my glucose curve overnight and look at how that would sleep patterns, which is another day. But here's another interesting thing, and I did the math this morning.
Okay.
The week that I was eating carbohydrates, every morning I take my blood pressure.
Okay.
My average blood pressure for the week of February 23rd to March 1st was a 131 over 81.5.
Average blood sugar, 131.
My blood pressure was 131 over 81.
Okay.
Almost 82, okay? That was the average blood pressure for that 7-day period. When I went back to low carb, my blood pressure was 122 over 77.
And so anybody listening, you want your blood pressure to be 120 over 80.
Over 80.
Or below.
So my blood pressure, systolic blood pressure went down 8%.
Yeah.
And diastolic went down about 3%. And the only difference in what I was doing was higher carb versus lower carb. And I wasn't high carb by any stretch of imagination or definition. So the other thing that I was told you I was going to do this morning is I went back and I looked at the previous 3 weeks of blood pressure to see if what was my average blood pressure for the 3 weeks preceding the high carb experiment. And then we got the high carb experiment and then back on low carb. Okay. The 3 weeks preceding the high carb experiment, my blood pressure was exactly the same as it has been the week after, which is about 122/77, 122/75 actually.
Okay.
So I want to put that. I wanted to go.
I love that.
I mean, that's a lot to go over in context.
It is. Can I interrupt you for a minute? I have a
Absolutely.
question. Based on, you said you felt terrible. Like, what did you have any sense of talking about sleep, anxiety, or just brain fog?
Yes. The day I went to CC's Pizza, the rest of that day I went for lunch because I fast, and my wife had a meeting, so we weren't going to eat dinner together that night. So I was like, I'll just go do this. And I was like the Taco Bell dog the rest of the day. I mean, my head is just, I sat down in the chair when I got home to watch the news or just kind of catch up, sit down, read what happened on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
And in 10 minutes, I was asleep.
Oh, wow.
Drooling.
Okay, so energy was low as well.
Low energy.
Sleep was bad.
The brain fog. When I'm eating carbohydrates, I'm more anxious.
Yes.
I'm generically more anxious. Because I used the Oura Ring, I looked at my sleep patterns for those 2 weeks, which I just wanted to go over the general stuff. I mean, I could go into some detail and tell you about, when I was eating carbohydrates, my average heart rate variability was lower overnight. My heart rate variability was lower. Heart rate variability, you want as high as you can get it because it's just a measure of how your autonomic nervous system is working and how much stress the system is under. If you look at my resting heart rate overnight on carbs, it was higher than when I'm not on carbs. If you look at sleep scores, if you look at activity scores, if you look at wellness scores, all of the data on the Oura Ring was hosed up that whole week. I mean, there are so many metrics that get worsened when I eat carbohydrates.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of our nutrition, right? I don't like the word diet, but we'll put it in this context for today's purpose. But I don't think diet is so much about willpower. People think it's more about willpower. I mean, it is when you're changing something, but it's so much more about biology. What's going on in our body? Your body was working in overdrive. Your ghrelin, your leptin, your glucagon, your glucagon wasn't on, your insulin, and it was working on overdrive. One, for that change, but all because your body isn't used to that. But there's so much that I know we'll go into. I know you're going to get.
Well, the calorie you last week when I asked you about did you learn calories in, calories out in school, it was 100%.
Sure,
it was everything that was in, calories out.
Yeah.
I pulled up a study, and I printed a picture for you, and I forgot to give it to you before we got started. This is Kevin Hall, who's a National Institutes of Health researcher.
Okay.
And Kevin Hall and my guy, Gary Taubes, have been going back and forth about the carbohydrate insulin model versus the calories in, calories out model. So the shift happened in 2022. The shift has kind of moved where they're not talking about calories in, calories out anymore because they have finally, the calories in, calories out people have finally admitted that model is just too simple and there are too many stupid things about that model.
Yep.
One of the ones that I talk with people a lot is, if you gain 20 pounds over 20 years, that means you're gaining 1 pound a year. Mm-hmm. If you say that a pound of fat is 3,500 calories and there's 365 days a year, that means that you had an excess of 10 calories per day, actually 9.5. Mm-hmm. 9.5 calories a day is the difference between weighing 20 pounds more in 20 years. Yeah. That's a lifesaver.
Right, yeah.
So you're saying that the people who are keeping their weight the same, they have a homeostatic weight, are controlling their caloric intake to the level of a lifesaver a day? Does that make sense?
No. It is 100% due to what we will talk about, that carbohydrate insulin model and how our body responds. But more than anything, what we're eating all the processed foods, the whole grains, which no food is really a good whole grain, the sugary breakfast meals. I don't know if you have if you want to go over this first.
Well, what you're mentioning is exactly what's interesting to me about this graphic, and I'll put the graphic up when I edit the podcast. This is the graphic that came along with Hall et al. 2020. If you look at Hall et al. 2020 and search for the energy balance, they don't call it calories in, calories out anymore. Okay?
No, right.
They don't call it that. They call it the energy balance model, because the calories in, calories out model was too simplistic and they couldn't defend it effectively. So that they came up with this, which is the energy balance model.
And sorry, let's clarify. So calories in, calories out is calories in means anything you're eating or drinking. Calories out is anything that you're expending. Daily activity, you're exercising, you're gardening, you're standing up, working, that sort of thing. I just want to make sure to clarify in case people are like, well, what does that mean? So they come
up with Kevin Hall and his cohort came up with this picture of what they now call the energy balance model, instead of calories in, calories out. And they say that the food environment creates a ubiquitous, cheap, convenient, energy-dense, ultra-processed foods high in portion size, fat, sugar, low in protein and fiber, which then affects the way our brain works. And then the brain makes us intake food, and the food excretes energy, and it creates circulating fluids. And there's this whole picture about how all this stuff is supposed to work together. And it reminds me of a teenager lying. It's like they told the calories in, calories out lie, and then that lie started getting holes poked in it. So the lie just keeps getting more and more and more complex. And it's like this thing that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes and a whole bunch of dotted lines and blue lines and green lines and red lines will make it all come true.
Uh-huh.
And the thing I find particularly uninteresting about this particular graphic is, if you look at what they're saying, 99% of what they're saying on this graphic is the carbohydrate insulin model.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Because here's the thing, when you're intaking those carbohydrates, there's so much that goes on. Your insulin, we've talked about this the last couple of weeks. Your insulin goes up. Your blood sugar goes up, your insulin goes up to get that blood sugar into the cells, whether it's going into your liver, your muscle, or it's stored as glycogen is your liver and your muscles, or it's stored as fat. When that happens, then so many other hormones are affected that we just don't even realize. Like looking at it here, your leptin, that leptin is that when we have a higher carbohydrate diet, our leptin is that hormone that's going to say, oh, okay. Or let me go back. Sorry. When we have a higher carbohydrate diet, that leptin hormone is going to say, okay, I'm good, I'm full, did I just say when we have a higher carbohydrate diet?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, when we have a lower carbohydrate diet, our leptin's going to be there to say, oh, I'm full, I'm good, I have all the energy I need. But once we have those higher carbohydrates, like we're seeing on this model, I think we could take from this, like when you increase your carbohydrate, that's why you were probably still hungry, right? You weren't feeling great because now your ghrelin hormone is turned on. Your ghrelin is the opposite of your leptin, and that's saying, give me more, give me more, give me more. And that's why so many people are thinking, I'm just so hungry. I don't know why, but I'm so hungry. And I think I'm looking at this model just for the first time, but I think that's really where it's showing our leptin is turned on, right?
Yeah. They show that as the adipose tissue goes up, the leptins are
turned off, increase in adipose.
And my point is that the model itself, the carbohydrate insulin model, I think is a much better model. Mm-hmm. But what they have finally, in the energy balance model now, instead of calling it calories in, calories out, what they finally said is what you said last week that made the penny drop for me to start looking for this kind of graphic, which was food is a signal. Mm-hmm. You were talking about how food is a signal to the body, and how you eat and what you eat signals the body as to what to do with those calories and that stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk. So calories in, calories out. I don't buy into it. You don't buy into it. The whole conversation about what I did for calories and my caloric mix for the last 2 weeks was an intro into why over time I have become a believer in the carbohydrate insulin model. And so I want to talk a little bit about the history of calories in, calories out versus carbohydrate insulin. And we talked about how in the 30s they could measure calories, they could measure energy density of food, but didn't have a good way of measuring all of the hormone effects from what eating food is.
Right.
And one of the insights that people need to undertake is that scientists study what they can measure.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't measure it, I mean, absent the ability to do a titration to find out how much circulating insulin you had, why would you study insulin? Because you can't find it, you can't measure it, you can't look at increases. So that calories in, calories out model was a paradigm that got stuck, and it's been stuck for a long time in the science.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting part of that is that it was never a part of the culture. If you go back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. In fact, they called dieting Banting because there was an Englishman and his name was Banting, and he went to his doctor all the time because he was excessively corpulent. And the Banting diet was you cut out sugars and starches and ate a lot of meat. When I was a kid, that's what your grandmother would tell you: is if you wanted to lose weight, cut out the sugars, quit eating bread.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the culture, and that was what everybody knew to be the case, is to cut back on carbohydrates until the carbohydrate was low enough that you could lose weight. And that's what the culture did until the science came along and said, no, it's calories in, calories out. A calorie is a calorie. Doesn't matter whether it's a protein calorie or a fat calorie or a sugar calorie. Mm-hmm. And we talked about how that led to the kind of foods that this graphic talks about, were those ultra processed foods,
right?
Because it got to be a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. Gary Taubes, and he's mentioned, in fact, Gary Taubes wrote a rebuttal to this particular paper, to the Hall 2020 paper here. Gary Taubes wrote a rebuttal to it because in the paper, if you read the paper, one of the things that they say in the paper is that the calories in, calories out, or good calories, bad calories, was the book that really elucidated and updated the concept and looked at the science of the carbohydrate insulin model. Mm-hmm. So that's how we kind of got to where we are, is the science was able to measure calories in, calories out. They weren't able to measure all of the complex interactions that are actually taking place.
Right.
So they defaulted to that calories in, calories out model, even though history tells us that's not the case. People started doing some research on it and understanding the insulin and how the insulin drove it, and then the carbohydrate insulin model of weight loss is now gaining popularity. Are you surprised that people haven't just said, oh yeah, that's right, and done away with calories in, calories out?
I'm not surprised because I don't think the education is still out there. Like, I don't think people have even heard the word carbohydrate insulin model. I don't think people have heard the word, maybe the word insulin, but I don't think people understand what insulin is, that insulin's the major driver of this hormonal response, and that it's not so much about calories in versus calories out. It's more about that insulin is what's going to help our bodies realize, well, depending on what insulin does, are we in fat burning mode, and how our food's being metabolized. I don't think people make that distinction at all. I would be interested to know how many people have even heard of this. Do you know what I mean? Are you surprised?
I guess I am more surprised by the intractability of the scientific community to
Oh, I see.
To go in and say, maybe we need to re-examine, to have Kevin Hall and the people at Tufts, the Friedman School of Nutrition at Tufts, or the Chan School of Nutrition at Harvard, arguing that it's calories in, calories out. It's incomprehensible to me that they continue to defend this model.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. On a scientific level, I was thinking just, consumer.
Well, there's two pieces.
But
for the layman, absolutely. After the food pyramid and the damage that we've done vilifying fat and all that, for the layman not to have heard of carbohydrate insulin is not a surprise to me at all. But for the science to be so intransigent about it's calories in, calories out, it's calories in, calories out. Because, there are so many examples. We talked about, a minute ago, I said, if to not to not gain, and the carbohydrate insulin model is the idea that there's a homeostatic process in place.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about homeostatic processes in nutrition.
So our body should always be at that homeostasis, right? Just this homeo meaning the same, stasis meaning stable. Once it goes out of whack, our hormones are kind of like a domino effect. So you have, and I really believe it all starts with insulin. That's just like a boom, little domino for it to all go down. And I don't know if we've talked about this before, but some people would say 7. I would say there's 9 hormones to really affect our weight loss and our health. And again, it starts with that insulin. So if we're eating sugars, right? Breads, rice, pasta, cereals, sugar-filled yogurts, granola bars, all of that, our blood sugar goes up. All right. So we've talked about this many times. What happens when our blood sugar goes up? Our insulin spikes to get that blood sugar into the cell or other tissues. Well, we only need 15% of that. 85% is stored as fat. And then we're hungry again. All right. Hunger hits. So we have our sugar again. Blood sugar goes up, insulin spikes, stored as fat, blood sugar goes up again. So we're going through this battle all day long of our blood sugars going up and down, insulin going up and down. Well, when that happens, that's when we get health issues. People are saying, I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s, 50s. Why do I have high blood pressure? Why do I have high blood sugar or prediabetes or acid reflux? Why am I having these things? Part of that is to do with your insulin. The other part of that is when your insulin goes up over and over and over like that, it increases your cortisol hormone. And our cortisol is our stress hormone. It's great. We need our stress hormone. It's highest in the day to get us through the day, and then it should go down in the day. I don't know any people that would say that our cortisol is going down in the day after outside factors, right? Environmental factors, traffic, spouse, kids, finances, social media comparisons, all of that. So like I said, we got our insulin going up and having these issues, then our cortisol goes up from outside stressors and the inside stressors of this insulin spikes that we're having. Cortisol goes up. Your body only has so much cortisol. Okay, so now we're really getting out of whack of homeostasis. This line is completely out of whack. And so when our cortisol goes up and it caps, what's it going to do? How are we going to get help now? Well, our body's going to steal from our sex hormones. So progesterone for women, testosterone for men, even though women have testosterone as well. So now it's stealing from our sex hormones, which we don't want those low for obvious reasons, but many other reasons as well. Joint pain, swelling, brain fog.
So when you're talking about stealing from the sex hormones, you're saying that after cortisol has reached its limit, the body, because it's in a state of stress, is still looking for something that drives that heightened state of awareness, fight or flight process.
Right.
So you're saying that after the cortisol goes up, when you reach some limit of cortisol, the body is still trying to fight that stress off with the physiological reaction that it expects for fight or flight. And so it starts using the sex hormones to accomplish the same thing in the body.
Yeah. You got progesterone, testosterone, your DHEA, your thyroid in there. And then the major culprit is now we're estrogen dominant. So you got your sex hormones low, right? Anybody who I'm sure is listening to this, either it's you or you know somebody who has gone to get testosterone pellets, get your testosterone looked at, your progesterone, the sex hormones. Well, now we're estrogen dominant. And when we are estrogen dominant, we will not lose weight. It will not happen. Our body's completely out of whack. We're out of our homeostasis. And then the other thing is the reason why we feel cruddy and we have these huge hormonal shifts of like, I love you. I can't stand you. I am just so happy today. I don't know what's going on. And then like, I don't know what's going on this week. I'm like so emotional. I'm crying at this. And then I'm all good. I feel like I'm fine. No, I don't need to go to the doctor. I'm good. I feel like I'm good. And when we're feeling those mood swings, for sure, that's a major predictor that our hormones are out of balance. So we really want our body to be in this homeostasis level. And again, it all starts with insulin. Insulin is the knocking power of everything else.
And that cascade that starts with insulin, the only thing that we eat that drives insulin up is carbohydrates.
Yes.
There's some. Well, now let me.
You can't.
you can eat protein, and protein can drive some insulin response through a glutamine response.
Right. You can overindulge. Sure.
So, I mean, but generically,
Right.
for insulin to go up, insulin is driven by carbohydrates. So this entire hormonal cascade that you're talking about, the first domino to fall is insulin.
Yes. And I believe that unfortunately really starts with a lot of us with breakfast. The average American foods that we just think are normal breakfast foods, like muffins, bagels, pancakes, right? Again, sugar-filled yogurts, these things that we don't even realize, like really we should just be having protein and fat in the morning. So we're not starting this cascade to happen. And I think it's one of the most impactful. I also think it's the easiest. I think some people might say that breakfast is the hardest to not have those carbohydrates, but I think, again, it's just because we're so used to it and we've grown up with that. Or Pop-Tarts, which, oh my goodness, the worst possible breakfast item. Like those should be illegal also. But it's pretty easy. I think that we also grew up with like thinking that, oh, chicken can't be for breakfast. Vegetables can't be for breakfast. I could heat up leftover vegetables from the night before, throw some cheese on it, maybe crack an egg on it, and I'm good to go for that.
Well, and that's one of, and you know, heat up some vegetables and put some cheese on it. One of the things that has been a central theme in what I have done since I have started eating this way for years and years is, for me, when I was eating vegetables, now I'm essentially carnivore, but when I was eating vegetables, for me, vegetables were fat delivery devices.
Growing up.
The reason to have a vegetable for me now is to put some fat on it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have broccoli. I'm going to have broccoli covered up in cheese sauce. Mm-hmm. Or if I'm not going to have broccoli, I'm going to have broccoli covered up with butter. I mean, vegetables are going to bring fat with them, period, paragraph, because green vegetables. You know, I'm not sugaring up the. I don't eat. The only vegetables I eat are green vegetables. The only vegetables I eat are spinach, broccoli, broccolini, Brussels sprouts.
Okay, those are good ones.
Cauliflower is not green, but I'll eat cauliflower.
Peppers.
Oh, I eat a lot of peppers.
Good.
I eat a lot of peppers. If and we'll talk about this in a bunch of different places. One of the fights that I think is unfortunate about, no one's more self-righteous than the reformed. Mm-hmm. The person that's reformed, whether it's a reformed alcoholic or a reformed carboholic, they are ready to slay the dragon. And there's so many fights that happen about what's real keto and what's real carnivore, mm-hmm. or what's real Atkins, or what's, I'm a carnivore. And by there are people out there who would be very upset with me that I eat peppers mm-hmm. on my steak, because that's mm-hmm. not real carnivore. If you're real carnivore, you don't eat any kind of vegetable matter. Really, seriously.
Yeah.
Give me a break. So anyway, there's that cascade starts with the insulin that is driven by consuming carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Here's the interesting point I want to go back to. As we talk about science studies what they can measure. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the issues with the calories in, calories out model, and the failure of the calories in, calories out model versus what should be the success of the carbohydrate insulin model, is that how many people, when they go to the doctor and they get their annual labs done, mm-hmm. get a fasting insulin level? Mm-hmm. That answer is astonishingly small. That is approaching zero. Mm-hmm. But here's what people don't understand. If you graph somebody who in their 50s gets type 2 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes is defined, I think, now at 126, fasting glucose of 126 or higher.
Yep.
Okay.
200 if you're doing a glucose response 1 to 2 hours after.
So they go to the doctor when they're 25 and when they're 30 and when they're 35 and when they're 40, okay? And the doctor does their metabolic panel, and the doctor says, man, your fasting glucose is 97, you're good. It's 102, you're good. It's 100, you're good. You're good, you're good, you're good, you're good. For 30 years, they look at fasting glucose. And that fasting glucose is going along just fine. And then they get to 45, and the fasting glucose starts kind of edging up. And the doctor goes, yeah, fasting glucose this year is 110, 112. That you need to eat less, move more.
Yeah, it's usually when they'll say, or you've got pre-diabetes.
Calories in, calories out. You need to eat less. You need to move more. You're edging towards diabetes. This is in the pre-diabetes range.
Yeah.
And so calories in, calories out doesn't work. We have 50 years of advice where people have been telling us eat less, move more. Hasn't worked. We're getting fatter. We're getting sicker. That maybe the advice sucks. Maybe
Just
the model's wrong. So anyway, they're 45 and their insulin or their blood sugar is 110, and the doctor says you get up, and then the next year it's like, oh God, it's 120. You are this close to type 2 diabetes.
Right. Yeah.
What we need to do is let's just try metformin to help you manage that blood sugar. What does metformin do? It makes you gain weight. And we'll talk about why this is important in just a moment, but it makes you gain weight. Good. So the next year, you got to up the metformin dose because now their fasting blood sugar is above 126. They are a diagnosed
diabetic.
Type 2 diabetic.
Yep.
Bob's your uncle. Here we go. Here's what they missed. If for that 30-year period, you had been doing a fasting insulin instead of fasting glucose, what you would have seen is while the glucose level is going like this, the insulin level is going like this.
Yeah.
Because in any system, any biological system, if you get a whole bunch of something, the body adapts to that. It reacts to too much exercise. It reacts to increased exercise. It reacts to too much insulin. It becomes insulin resistant. So that insulin resistance that you see, if you had been measuring insulin instead of blood glucose, you could have seen this train wreck coming 30 years ago.
Right, and be able to say, oh, okay, my insulin is not clearing the blood sugar out of my cells efficiently. Oh, I should make some changes to that.
And those changes could have happened decades before you're a type 2 diabetic.
Absolutely.
Decades before. So the fact that it was easy to measure blood sugar and that you could measure blood sugar at home, okay, that is what I think tricks us because, when I talk to people about, my blood sugar's fine. But that's not what you should be measuring. What you should be measuring is your insulin. Because as you said, and so clearly explained, insulin is the first domino in that cascade of bad stuff that happens, and that is driven by carbohydrates.
100%. And when our insulin is high and it's not clearing that out, people, a doctor will say, oh, we have a blood sugar issue. I believe you now also have a brain sugar issue as well, because your brain is wanting to feed more, but your insulin is not being able to respond. And then again, there's this whole cascade event that's going. Also, those cells are dying, and we never want our brain cells to die, right? Our brain is 2% of our body weight. It needs 20% of energy, 10 times as much. It's like an electrical, we'll just say it's like electricity, right? It's on 24/7. And if we're not feeding it good fuel and we're not being able to clear out that blood sugar that's going to our brain and help with the insulin, well, then that's why we've got all the issues with Alzheimer's, I think, even more. And now it's type 3 diabetes, which is
type 3 diabetes. Insulin, when in the presence of insulin, you also get IGF-1, which is insulin growth factor. What does insulin growth factor do in the body? Among other things, it creates hypertrophy within vascular structures. In other words, the insides of your arteries and veins grow. Those cells get bigger. What happens to a pressure in a hose if you decrease the diameter of the hose? See, the fact that my blood pressure went up 8% on 1 week eating carbohydrates because I had a lot more circulating insulin and IGF-1, which creates hypertrophy in the vascular system, which drives up blood pressure. What they used to call idiopathic blood pressure. You know what idiopathic means? It means we don't know.
Yeah, right.
He's got idiopathic blood pressure. What is that? It means we have no idea what the cause is.
Yeah.
So the carbohydrate insulin model is that if you cut down carbohydrates, you stop that cascade of bad stuff that happens that yields the insulin resistance. The insulin resistance drives type 2 diabetes. The insulin resistance drives higher blood sugar. That hyperglycemia drives heart disease. The hyperglycemia drives blood pressure. The hyperglycemia drives fat storage. Hyperglycemia drives insulin resistance in the brain. So the brain is less able to use the glucose that is circulating. There are interesting PET studies on brains of Alzheimer's patients. They are very ineffective at processing and metabolizing glucose. The brain has effectively become insulin resistant.
That's right. That's why it's that brain sugar problem. And then you've got those cascading events, but then you've also got the issues of your leptin. Now your leptin and your ghrelin. Remember ghrelin, I always think, grr, like I'm hungry. Your ghrelin response is increased. Your leptin response of telling you full is decreased. And so then those are also the feelings that you have or people have when they're really, really hungry and they just feel like they can't stop eating. Or now also their body craves this high fat and high sugar because that high fat and high sugar can actually bring down that cortisol stress response for a minute. Which so you're like, that's why people call them comfort foods, right? It's that feeling that stress go down, but that was like nothing. And in turn, you only increased that insulin response, which is going to drive up that cortisol even more, and then the cascading events.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting to me about to go back to why are the scientists why is the science culture so focused on defending the carbohydrate or the calories in, calories out hill? Why are they? Because there are so many examples, and the example I used earlier is that if over 20 years you gain 20 pounds, that's an extra lifesaver a day.
Yeah.
Gary Taubes makes the observation, and I really like the observation that all the people that I've seen that are big calories in, calories out defenders are all whippet thin. I don't see any calories in, calories out defenders that are pudgy, much less obese.
Defenders. Okay.
The defenders of calories in,
I
calories
thought you
out.
were. Sorry,
All the defenders of calories in, calories out are this big around.
What do you mean? Okay. Yeah.
Because it works for them.
Yeah.
And they have no idea that maybe the milieu in which I operate is different from the microbiome, from history, from genetics, from whatever.
Yeah.
That maybe, just maybe, as I think this is an N equals 1 experiment. All of my experiments are N equals 1 experiments because I'm all the time experimenting on me.
I love it.
So what I have found by experimenting on me is if I eat very few carbs, I eat less food, which may be the carbohydrate insulin model. That's why they argue, if you don't eat carbohydrates, you eat less. And if you eat those other things, if you're eating fat and you're eating meat, you're more satiated.
Yeah.
So you eat fewer calories. Okay. And that's a bad thing because why?
Right.
That's part of the argument that drives me crazy with the science people is the science people are all about it's all calories, it's calories in, calories out. Mm-hmm. You should eat less. Mm-hmm. Okay. If I find a way of eating that makes me eat less, shouldn't you be supportive of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't, to go back to your question on why are scientists not taking on that carbohydrate insulin model? It's something I really want to look into because I can see it as consumers, right? We don't understand. So why? And it's easy for doctors to just say, eat less, move more. Because I think we had said this last week, to a point, yeah, that is going to work. If somebody is 400 pounds, 300 pounds, and they're overeating, sure, you're going to eat less calories. Yes, you can lose weight, but there will come a standpoint. And that
Where your
doesn't mean
body
that that's
reaches
changing
well,
your insulin,
where your body reaches homeostasis given your set of hormonal responses.
right.
It's just that your set of hormonal responses may have you 35 or 40% above your ideal weight, whereas the calories in, calories out guy, his homeostasis is at his ideal weight.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's where people aren't, maybe their acid reflux still hasn't gone away. Their migraines still haven't gone away. There's a reason why when I work with people within 2 weeks, I always say maybe day 15, day 16. Honestly, I do that for safety for their mental health. I tell them, you might not see health benefits for day 15, day 16. But most of the time it's really before then. But I'll give you 2 weeks. And then there's a reason why when I work with people or we work on this plan, mainly dealing with carbohydrate insulin model, but really getting your hormones balanced instantly. After we go through that detox, that 4-day detox, maybe 3-day detox, day 5, day 6, people are like, oh my gosh, I can sleep again. I don't have migraines. I have people who have migraines for 20 years and never had a migraine again.
That was one of when I found it when my wife, God love her, when I started talking about keto, she fought the hook because she had nutrition. She's a nurse.
Yes.
But God love her, she said, well, just tell me what you're thinking. And I got her to read the books. And one of the first outcomes that we got for her, we would go to New Orleans and she would be in a panic if she forgot her sumatriptan, because what if she had a migraine?
Oh, wow. And
There was when we were early on when we were married, one of the trips to New Orleans that was terribly, it was a really bad trip, is she had forgotten her sumatriptan and it was trying to get a hold of her doctor up here to get a prescription down there so that we could go pick up the sumatriptan. And
they're debilitating.
And she went low carb towards keto. And it was like a year.
Wow.
And she had a little bit of a headache. And she said, I got a little bit of a headache. And I said, like a migraine? She said, no, I don't. And then we both went, oh my God.
Yeah.
It has been a year since you had a migraine.
That's amazing. And see, that's what happens. One, we don't realize how bad we felt until we feel good.
Exactly.
And it's interesting when people are going through their journey, weight loss journey, health journey, we were talking about journaling, is to even start journaling that, because it's crazy how bad we felt. And then 6 months later, maybe you're feeling amazing. You've lost all this weight. You're sleeping better. You don't have acid reflux, blah, blah, blah. You don't have migraines. You don't have hot flashes. We're still focused on the scale. We forget how bad we used to feel, because we're never going back there again. But we forget, my goodness, I forgot about all those migraines. It's pretty amazing what how our life can change.
And after you start looking at it, and I'll go back to, we've kind of moved from, look at our time. You and I could do this for 6 hours.
I know.
I keep paying attention to time because I don't want this Joe Rogan 3-hour podcast thing to go on. There are so many indications that hormones are what drive it. Okay, I mean, if you look at your boys, okay,
mm-hmm.
Are your boys growing because they eat more? Or are your boys growing because they have a very different hormonal environment than I have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not like kids grow because they eat more calories. If it's calories in, calories out, it's like, well, wait a minute. Is that why kids are growing? No, kids are growing because of the hormonal milieu in which they live. When you reach puberty, how come you accumulated fat differently in puberty than I accumulated fat in puberty?
Right.
Females put
Hormones,
fat in
hormones,
different
hormones.
places than males do in puberty.
Mm-hmm.
Is that determined by how many calories they're eating?
Right.
No, it's determined by the hormonal milieu in which they exist.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that science, they would never argue that your kid's growing because he's eating more calories? They would never argue that your daughter accumulates fat around her hips in puberty and your son doesn't because of how many calories they're eating.
Right.
It's like they understand the whole idea behind the way that you grow and the way that you process food and the food that signals in the body and the things that happen in the body. Everything, they get it. It's absolutely hormones until you reach puberty, and then bam, it's calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
It's like from this point forward, everything that happened from an endocrine system up to there, it's like, it's gone.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
There's in one of the Gary Taubes books, is Case for Keto. One of the most interesting things, and I went and looked it up. There is a textbook. It's a biochemistry textbook, and it is the biochemistry textbook. Most disciplines have the standard. Bears and Carroll was our calculus book, and I'd go any place you go, you see the Bears and Carroll calculus. That is the calculus book. Well, the biochemistry textbook at the top of the page, it explains the carbohydrate insulin model for fat storage, and says that in the presence of insulin, fat cells will grow. Mm-hmm. And the only way to decrease the size of fat cells is drive down in the circulating insulin.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In the bottom of the same page, it says that the reason people get fat is an excess of caloric intake and energy. On the same page, the biochemistry textbook says that my cells get fat for one reason, but me as a whole get fat for a whole nother reason.
Wow, that's very interesting.
So all of that leads us to, why can't science correct this?
Now, I will say, let's say if I start to continue to eat, all of a sudden 1,000 more calories a day. I just want to put this in there so people don't think, oh, so I can just eat whatever. If let's say 500 calories more a day, we'll use the example we used last week for a pound a week. If I'm eating 500 calories more a day, now I can gain a pound a week. So to make sure people understand, don't just go and think, oh, calories don't matter. It's depending on, am I eating to make sure that, let me go back. If my blood sugar isn't spiking and I'm not having this insulin response, my body can burn off that fuel efficiently and be okay. But if I do eat 500 calories more a day of crap processed food and wheat and flour and sugar, well then yes, yes, I've got more calories, but what is that doing? It's also doing a cascade event to the hormones at the same time.
And I would argue, and I have argued. People say calories matter. When I first started the Atkins diet back in the day, my mom was like, "You need to try the Atkins diet."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Mom, I love you, but here's the deal: law of conservation of mass and energy. It's not just a good idea; it's the law. I don't care if you eat 5,000 calories of broccoli a day. You're going to gain weight.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because it's conservation of mass and energy.
All right.
But here's the point that I would make. Yes, if calories do matter to some extent, because you can eat too many calories, okay? I get that. How hard is it to eat too many calories of steak?
Yes, exactly. There's a big difference.
How hard is it to eat too many calories of eggs?
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
And that's the fallacy, I think. And people say, well, yeah, but calories still matter. Well, okay. Look at my results. Okay. When I'm eating carbohydrates, my caloric deficit was 1,000 calories a day. When I wasn't eating carbohydrates, my caloric deficit was 400 calories a day higher. Because I wasn't eating the stuff that made me eat more, which is why the Hall diagram is interesting to me, as they say, the kinds of food and the food environment we live in makes you eat more, and it messes up your regulation. It's like, well, you blame ultra-processed foods, but couldn't you just simplify that to carbohydrates?
Right.
Because the science is really clear on the carbohydrates.
Yeah.
There's a Upton Sinclair quote. It's one of my favorite quotes all time. Upton Sinclair said, "It is very difficult to get a man to understand something that his salary depends on his not understanding."
Okay. I like that.
How many of the studies, how many of the people that are doing the science have for years not understood, quote, not understood, calories in, calories out is the wrong model, because that wasn't a way to get funded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to mention that earlier. It just goes all back to what we talked about on last week's podcast, which I think was so great, really talking about how much there's funding out there and lobbyists, and it's easier because you're funded, the research is funded that way.
And the research is, there was an interesting study, and I'll have to go back and find the study. Climate science is another example. If you want to do a study that involves weather, your proposal has to have climate into it.
Okay.
I mean, you can be studying how rainfall affects newts in the swamps in Louisiana, but you better put something about global warming in your proposal, or you're not going to get funded.
Yeah, really great point.
So I've had this argument with my son, who's in the PhD program, and he sent me, and I'll show you the curves. There has been a fundamental change in the NIH reporter. If you do searches for studies that have keto in them, or that have carnivore in them, or that have vegan in them, the shift is beginning to happen. But why has it taken so long? And I think the key about why it has taken so long is that industry funds a lot of the studies, that there's hardening of the arteries because of diet. There's also hardening of the opinions. There are a bunch of scientists that have hardening of the opinions that aren't changing the way they're doing things. And Harvard and Chan, and then Tufts and Friedman schools of public health and nutrition, are run by people who don't believe the carbohydrate insulin model.
I agree. I also would say that when people have done low carb research, they put people on about 140 gram carbohydrate diet, which would be considered a low carbohydrate diet, because again, that's about 26% of the calories based on a 2,000 calorie diet. But that is not, we're going into, I would say, let's do these studies of 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrate, where we are on that model of helping our body be in this homeostasis. 140 grams low carb is great, but for most people, a lot of people, we're not helping with the insulin resistance, because what type of carbohydrates are they actually having? There's studies just really, I don't think, are there. Like you said, they might be turning there on the carnivore and keto type plan. So I think when these scientists look at this, I don't think they maybe are seeing the results as much, because low carb is considered 140 grams of carbs.
And there's there's three things. I mean, we talk about these things, and I say something that makes you think of four things, and you say something that makes you think of four things. When I was looking at the Hall study, I went back to look at the Hall study, and I was looking at some of the references of the Hall study. And one of the studies that the Hall study talks about is that there's plenty of proof that high glycemic load diets and low glycemic load diets don't change the weight loss outcome, which is arguing against the carbohydrate insulin model,
right? Because
glycemic index has to do with insulin response. So I go look at the study that they cite as the study, because if you do science and you start reading studies, you go down a rabbit hole for the references in this study and references in that study. So I go look at the study that they're referencing, where they said that the weight loss between a high glycemic load and low glycemic load diets was the same. There's no difference. So go look at the high glycemic load and low glycemic load diets.
Mm-hmm.
The diets that they tested, the high glycemic load diet was 60% carbohydrate, and the low one was 40% carbohydrate. In other words, the high glycemic load followed the food pyramid concept of 60% of your calories are from carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And about 30% or less are from fats, and then there's some protein in there.
Yeah.
So they're the people that they were measuring, if you go down and read the rest of the study, is they were comparing people's weight loss on 300 grams of carbohydrates a day versus 200 grams of carbohydrates a day. So I sorry about that. In fairness, maybe they're not that dumb. Or maybe, I'm sorry, in fairness, maybe they are just that dumb. Maybe they're not purposefully putting their thumb on the scale. They just can't get their head around that when I say low carbohydrate, I'm talking about 50 grams or less.
Yeah.
And when I'm saying keto, I'm talking about 25 grams or less.
Right.
And when I'm saying carnivore, I'm saying under 10 grams a day.
Yes.
Because they just can't conceptualize that that's possible, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Fiber plays a big role in that. And you and I will have a big discussion about fiber. But I particularly got interested in the science because I read the Hall study. This week, I'm wearing a constant glucose monitor because I'm doing another study on me.
Yeah. I love these.
I'm doing another N equals 1.
I'm so excited for this.
So here is where I think the public gets misinformed or badly informed. Because I'm wearing the constant glucose monitor, I saw a study. It showed up in the U.S. News and World Report. It showed up in several different papers. It showed up in the media, and I can put the study reference in the show notes. It's a constant glucose study that assesses the difference in glycemic impact for various foods or drinks. And that the concept of the study was that constant glucose monitors ineffectively measure the glycemic impact of various foods.
Okay.
Basically, they're arguing that maybe a constant glucose monitor won't give you good information about making informed decisions about what the glycemic impact of food is based on the curve that the constant glucose monitor shows you.
But that doesn't make sense because because what I'm looking at in a constant glucose monitor is, sure, your blood sugar 1 to 2 hours after eating, right? Which we want like 140 or less, but also
variability.
Yeah, and how much that glucose comes down and how fast it comes down, so we get back to the insulin resistance.
So I look at the study, and it's like, wow. Because they're arguing that glucose monitors may not be a good thing for people. Because one of the things that I will tell you about wearing a have you worn one yet?
No, but now I really want to.
Stello, you can. Dexcom has the Stello.
Okay.
And it's $89 a month.
Okay.
And you can, and they send you 2 of them, and you wear it. There's like 15 days. And the thing about wearing a constant glucose monitor is you cannot unsee the curves after you've seen them.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
I used to eat low carb tortillas because I thought low carb tortillas, I mean, they're like 4 net grams of carbs. They've got like 30, 20, 15, 20, I don't remember how many total carbs, but net carbs because of the fiber.
Right. Which means that's what affects your blood sugar.
So I'm like, cool.
And is absorbed.
And so anytime I was like getting a little hungry, it's a little before dinner, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some pimento cheese and throw it on a low carb tortilla and have like a pimento cheese burrito in the afternoon if I'm getting
college
nauseous.
Diet.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Which is homemade pimento cheese, low carb tortilla, had a constant glucose monitor on, ate that son of a gun, and my blood sugar went up 41 points in 15 minutes.
Wow.
You can't unsee that.
You can't see that, right? Those steak tortillas went in the trash.
You can't unsee that. So when I saw the study that said, okay, there's some differences, and the constant glucose monitors may not be reflective and give you good information to make decisions. So I go, okay, well, I got to go read this study.
Okay, let's hear it.
In the number of subjects in the study was 15.
Oh, goodness. Let's first just put it down. Not obviously put it down, but
equals 15, 9 females, 6 males. The way they did it is they did a 48-hour washout period. They would test their blood sugar on different interventions, and then they have a 48-hour washout, and then give them the intervention again. So they come in and they get a 50-gram glucose slug that's a control, and then they look at the blood sugar constant glucose monitor on that. And then they give them 50 grams of carbs in a fruit juice, which is what they call the whole, they called it the whole test, which is like a whole grain. It's a natural fruit juice. And then they did a commercial smoothie over 30 minutes, which was their slow test. And then they did a commercial smoothie with 5 grams of insulin in it, which is a fiber, to do a fiber test. And then a 30 gram commercial smoothie that was like the dosage that they were looking at for commercial smoothie. Okay. And then they would measure, they would look at the CGM curve compared to a glucometer to see what the glucometer measured versus what the CGM measured. And they have all these graphs that show that the constant glucose monitor had a higher peak and longer duration than the gold standard glucose monitor. Therefore, if you're drinking fruit smoothies and your blood sugar looks really bad, it's not as bad as it looks. It's still a spike. It still goes out. It's not as bad as it looks. But then if you look at the curves, the glucose, the blood glucose monitor and constant glucose monitors do not measure serum glucose. They measure the interstitial fluid. In other words, serum glucose is blood glucose. This is interstitial glucose. This is the glucose in the interstitial fluids between the cells. So when you put the little probe in, it doesn't get all the way to blood. It just measures the interstitial. So there's a difference. And the model, how the machine models that relationship changes those readings. Here's the point. Yes, at its peak, the glucose monitor was above the glucometer, but at the start, it was above it. And it maintains the same distance all the way down each of these curves. So the information that you're getting is this bump. And it doesn't matter whether it was a 40 bump or a 30 bump, it was still a bump. And they're making this big deal over the area under the curve with the constant glucose monitor is higher than the area under the curve from the gold standard glucometer. So that you're not getting good information to make informed decisions. And I'm like, okay, it's N equals 15 people.
Doesn't make sense.
If I look at the graphs, it's the shape of the curves are the same. If I look at the differences, it's what I saw when I would eat things and I go, can't eat that anymore. So their conclusion is that the CGM overestimates glycemic responses. And this is the direct quote. At times, this can mischaracterize the glycemic index. At times, this can mix. It doesn't. It can. Okay. I don't like the study. It's a stupid study. How did this get published and who did the study?
I'm interested in that.
Well, it turns out that the primary investigator is a consultant to Pepsi.
I was going to guess Coca-Cola.
Viacom, a 6D Sports, which is a sports nutrition, which is a sports drink people. The second person that he's also a communications modeling company he does things for to how they can correctly model communications. Sundori Beverages and the Dairy Council. All the places where you get carbohydrates and calories by drinking something.
Yeah.
And he's the guy that did the study that made the U.S. News and World Report that says maybe you shouldn't wear a glucose monitor because it may not give you good information. Sports fans and kayak enthusiasts, that's why the science isn't saving us.
They know how to easily manipulate a study with just that one little marker. And then it's published, and then that's what a doctor might see quick, or whoever else is out there. And then that's where things like the food guide pyramid takes off.
So the last thing, and then
Okay.
and then we'll go get on with our lives. Because this whole discussion that we're having now is about why isn't the science correcting it? Why is the science unable to correct from the calories in, calories out model to the carbohydrate insulin model? And there are economic drivers. I think that's the way I learned in college, and I don't have time to go learn something else. Drivers for in the medical community. There's the American Heart Association, American Diabetics, all the American dietitians, those people that will punish members of their societies for stepping outside the lines about calories in, calories out.
Right.
So we've got all these things that are pushing us to not really learn the lesson. The latest thing that I think is interesting in this cascade is I think a lot of people have been red-pilled, if you will, over the last 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
After the response to COVID, and after the response to the COVID vaccines, and after all of this stuff, people are not starting to believe. And here's what I think is important about this podcast, and is important about the discussions that we're having. And that is to quit trusting the science and dig one step deeper in everything that you do that's important to you. Because if you keep listening to the experts, they have drivers that may not align with your best interests.
Yeah, I love it. I was actually talking to my husband, Chris, the other day about this, and saying it was basically right along those lines, and saying that's one thing I want to teach our boys that I wish I had learned. And there's no offense to my parents in that. I mean, the world has completely changed since then. But is to always question something. I mean, coming from maybe not to always not trust. I probably shouldn't put that in their mind, but to always think, but where did this come from? And who are these experts? And let's just look a little bit further. And I think, like you just said, with COVID, and I think that was meant to drive us to listen to them more and to follow the rules. But it's nice to see that people are starting to realize, oh, maybe I should look further into this.
And the reason that I say that is, and this study on the constant glucose monitor is a good example. Did you know? Another little interesting fact. When they first came out with glucometers, that diabetes doctors were against their patients being able to measure their own glucose?
No, I did not know this. When was that? Oh, when they first came out.
Yeah.
Is that because they wanted the control? They didn't think they could do it right?
People just aren't smart enough. There's too much information. It's
they wouldn't know what to do with it.
Dosing is important. They can if they get a hypoglycemic, if they eat too much insulin and they get hypoglycemic, they can eat some candy.
Yeah, right.
They don't need it. They don't need this. This is just too hard. It's too hard for them to do that. Can you imagine in today's world telling someone that's diabetic, that's going to die of that disease, that they can't have the information that they need to manage the disease?
And it's sad because I believe knowledge is power and power is control. If we know while we're doing something, then I can control it. Like you see those tortillas. It may not be that you're not going to ever have them again. You maybe freeze them for later at a certain time. But you have that knowledge and that gives you that control to be like, I don't need that. I know what it does. Like you said, you can't unsee those numbers. So it is nice to see that. What a comparison to know that people weren't allowed to do it. And now it's like, yes, please.
And now the argument seems to be, I'm starting to see indications that those constant glucose monitors, we shouldn't have people out there looking at their glucose. I mean, there's just too much. It's just in it. The argument, there's three arguments about the glucose monitors. One is that they're expensive. Okay, well, they're coming down in price, and now it's $90 a month, which is not, one of the things that I fight when I talk about carnivores. People say, carnivore's too expensive. Well, go price a knee replacement.
I was about to say, or how much does that insulin cost you?
Go price bypass surgery.
Yeah.
If you think
absolutely,
that's but they're expensive, which is coming down. The second thing that they argue is that people will obsess over it. It's like you're gonna create a bunch of people that are suffering from food eating disorders because they're obsessing about the numbers that they're looking at on their glucose monitor or
same
their
thing as
constant
watching
glucose
calories.
monitor. It's like, well, so how are they going to measure? Is if they can measure calories? Are you going to take food labels off of foods because people are going to obsess about the labels?
Right.
Which, man, I'm telling you, you said your number one was read labels, and I've had so much fun reading labels.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
The third thing that they talked about is that it's complex. And I'll give you an example. One of them, the preview, one of the experiments that I did this week wearing the constant glucose monitor, that is a non-carbohydrate experiment because I wasn't going to increase carbohydrate load. I increased alcohol.
Okay.
It's a tough job.
I know. I'm so sorry you had to do that. I'm sure you felt terrible at the time of having to drink it.
Test. So on 2 nights with a 24-hour washout, I did it on Tuesday, and then I didn't drink on Wednesday, and then I did it on Thursday. And I don't drink every day by any means, but this is the protocol that I went through. Is I would start drinking. That's how I would end my fast. Is when I started cooking, I'd get a glass of whiskey.
Okay.
And just drink straight Scotch or bourbon. And over the course of from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night, I would have 4 ounces of whiskey at a rate of about an ounce an hour.
Okay.
And then look at what happens to blood sugar during that period of time because of the constant glucose monitor. And then what happens after you quit drinking the whiskey. Yeah. Interesting. It's a complex thing. It's not something that everybody's going to understand. My blood sugar, even when eating, remained flat or dropped slightly during the period of alcohol intake. And then at about 1:30 in the morning, blood sugar came up.
Because your liver was trying to clear out the alcohol.
Because the liver cleared the alcohol first before it started clearing the meal that came after.
Yeah, now, to get out that poison. And
they were low carb meals, and when I talk about it goes up, my high blood sugars in this week of essentially carnivore, my high blood sugar was like 103.
Okay.
I mean,
you think you're doing
so when I say the blood sugar goes up, I'm saying it goes from 78 to 102. I mean, it's not like it spikes, but it
still shows.
But that's the kind of information that they argue that it's just too hard for people to understand. The people that make decisions about their mortgage and what kind of cars to buy, and that have degrees in things like economics. That this whole constant glucose monitor thing is way too hard.
And it's so simple. If I were to tell somebody, hey, if you're waking up from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., your liver is trying to process. It's trying to clear out. That is why so many people wake up from that 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. It may be 1:30 a.m., maybe 1:45 a.m. Doesn't matter. But right around that time, that's when your liver is trying to do that. Okay, and now they have this glucose monitor or just this education here to be like, oh, that's why. It's really not that hard. And it's little steps to learn throughout the way.
And that's why I think this podcast is important. And I think that's why these conversations are becoming more and more important, is because people have the ability to make decisions for themselves. And people have ways that I think, look at how the science has said saturated fat bad for so long. Look at how the changes in the population are changing the responses of the restaurants, that now Steak Shack is advertising that we do our fries in beef tallow.
Oh, yes.
That surely was not driven by the T.C. Chan School of Business at Harvard.
Right.
That was driven by people getting smart about how you need to eat, and I'm excited about that.
To play on that, the Food Babe just did. Do you know the Food Babe? Ronnie
No.
Hart. Oh, she's amazing. Ronnie Hart. She's a very great food activist, and she's the one who really helped Kellogg's start to help move that movement to get food dyes out. Anyway, she just did a little Instagram reel on the Steak Shack, even though they've got these beef tallow French fries. What's in their hamburger buns and in their meat, and it was like this long of ingredients. It was insane. Poor Steak Shack. But she's a food activist, right? She's like, yeah, good for you. Great. I'm glad that you do grass-fed beef, no antibiotics, no hormones. But look at all this stuff we're still eating that we have no idea. So I'm so appreciative of the food activists and, you know, social media being good for that type of stuff, to be able to get that information and education out there of like, okay, like you said, let's look a little bit further into it.
And quit listening to the experts.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, experts.
I grabbed our thing. Here's what we've done. We've talked about fat hypothesis.
Yep.
And how that led to calories in, calories out, calories, a calorie, which led to sugar. And the sugar led to the tobacco companies making the ultra-processed food. And the ultra-processed food has really messed up the calories in, calories out versus the carbohydrate insulin model paradigm, which we talked about today, along with why science isn't correcting those mistakes. And I'll put in some graphs as I talk about this, we'll put in some graphs. If you search the NIH reporter, how many more studies are being done now on keto or these other things. So the next place that we're supposed to go that we'll talk about next week is, what is low carb eating? How do you define low carb eating? And how does that look like for how we move towards making eating healthy again by driving down the consumption of carbohydrates to cure that insulin hormone cascade that you talked about? You good with that?
Love it. We'll give some ideas, maybe some little quick recipe ideas. Be good.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
And we'll do it next week.
Okay. Thank you. Good talk. Bye.